We're going to take a moment to show you how I make this vector bike in Adobe Illustrator. I'm using Adobe Illustrator Creative Cloud. I do actually have some reference photos over off to the side here. Notice that I don't ever trace the reference photos. That's copyright infringement, and I mean, it's kind of lame anyway. But you're not expected as an artist or as a visual creator to just memorize what everything looks like. Reference photos are fine, but just don't trace them. So definitely don't live trace them, but take a look at them, and you'll notice that I'm not doing the same bike here, but I am using these as reference to see. I can't remember the pattern that spokes do, so I kind of look at that and try to copy it. So I've got a couple different bikes here, and I'm looking throughout this video at those things. So go ahead and watch. This is about a 20-minute video. I go pretty fast, and I've turned off where it shows my keystrokes because I sped the video up quite a bit. So I just try to talk through it as much as possible. If you want to know what I'm doing, check out my other videos that kind of explain in greater detail. I just wanted to show you something from start to finish. This is part one. Part two, we're going to go into more of like adding textures. Notice this still looks very, very vector. It doesn't look very realistic. It looks kind of very computery, which can be good, but I want to show you a little bit of realism too. So when we get to part two, here we will take a look at some other things, but let's get to this point now in this video. So I'm going to start off with the spokes. I just drew some lines with my pen tool, and then I reflect that, rotated them by alt-clicking in the center. Make sure to press copy, and then you just press Command D over and over again, and it'll rotate all the way around. And then this part's pretty easy. I'm just making a series of concentric circles and coloring them differently. I do Apple C, Apple F to paste in front. That pasted exactly in front rather than Apple V, and then I use the shape builder tool holding Alt to delete the center there, like that. Then I just make another copy of that circle, make another copy of that circle. I'm just slowly kind of building up a rim at this point. I'm going to add a gradient later, and then just use the shape builder tool holding Alt and click the parts that you want to cut out. Okay, change the color a little bit. Now I'm going to make the tread. I'm going to make one tread, just get a kind of a tread-like shape that I like, and I'm going to figure out how many times or how many degrees I want to go. Then again, copy, and then press Apple D over and over again, in this case a lot, and it'll give you tread all the way around. Then I'm going to lock everything, select that tread, group it, and center it on everything to make sure that it's going. I also like to name things as I do it because then I know what's going on. So there's one copy. I'm going to make a copy of that wheel. There's the other copy. So now we have two wheels just to check my reference. I don't trace over images, but I do use reference images. And I'm just going to make those bigger and about the proximity that I'm seeing there. You could measure things if you want, but I don't. Now I'm going to make the splash guards. Again, just concentric circles. Use the Pathfinder or the shape builder tool to cut it. Draw a line. Use that line and the shape builder tool again to cut it again. I'm just going to round off the edges there, giving it a little bit of a curve. Do the same thing on this side by adding an anchor point and then deleting this other one and letting that natural curve do that for me. Then I'm going to do the same thing again on this side. So on this side, I'm going to go in, I'm going to create a concentric circle. I'm going to expand that just a little bit so it hangs over, make another one, cut it out. I'm going into, press Command Y, it goes into a different view so you can see the outline, you don't get confused by the colors. And then I draw that line again, highlight everything, cut it with the shape builder tool, and I've got the rounded edges there as well. Now I'm going to create the bicycle frame. And a lot of times if you're creating like a tube or like a tendril or something, it's easier to create a stroke and then outline that stroke rather than create a shape and try to cut it. So I'm doing a heavy stroke here, and then later I am going to outline that stroke to make it a shape so that I can add and control things that way. So you notice that I'll do a lot of clicking and dragging while I'm holding Alt to copy. To make the little gear there on the petals, again, I like to see the shapes and see if I can do as much as possible with the shape tool. I know everybody uses the pen tool quite a bit, but I feel like sometimes the pen tool is overused. So I draw a line here, and then I use the line width tool. Notice that that's still a stroke, but you can alter the line width with the line width tool to Shift W. More circles to create more gears. I'm going to center it here, and coming up, I'm going to start cutting shapes out to get the gears. So I'm going to do that a lot on the bicycle here, where you rotate and copy in one step, and then once you do that once, then you can press Command D on a Mac or Control D on a PC, and that will repeat that step. So that repeats whatever step you just did. So notice I'm rotating it there. This is just tapping Command D a bunch of times for duplicate the last step. Then I'm going to get out my shape builder tool. I'm going to highlight some things, and I'm going to start deleting them here. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, and I'm kind of experimenting with the best ways here. And then as I cut those out, now I'm going to lock some things down so that I don't delete them, and then delete all of the shapes that I used to cut those out. Now I have that gear. Now we're going to make a nut, and I'm going to use my polygonal tool there. And a little trick is if you have a gradient and then you put a shape slightly smaller, the same shape slightly smaller on top of that shape, and reverse that gradient with the reverse gradient button, it gives it a little bit of depth. Then I'm just going to copy those over to where I want those to go. This is going to hold the little mud flap on, add a little bit of thickness to that, and then I'm just going to copy and paste in front, which is not Apple V, it's Apple F for paste in front. And then I'm just going to hit the R to switch to my rotate tool, and I'm just going to rotate by moving the pivot point down to that center, and then I just rotate that way. Now just get out your gradient tool and get that gradient to line up so that it follows the path that you want it to do. Then you just grab all the nuts, throw them on top. I'm going to drag that over while holding Alt and kind of manipulate that a little bit. Basically the same shape, so I don't have to remake them. I can just copy them over. Now the next part that I'm going to do is the bicycle tail light. So you'll notice that I'm referencing the photo, but I'm not tracing those photos. I want to draw this myself. So I am looking at that shape over there on the left as I do this. And notice it's got that little ridge. And then I'm going to create the light itself. Some keystrokes that you really want to get used to doing. Command-Shift left bracket will send everything all the way to the back of that particular layer. Command-Shift right bracket will send it all the way to the front. And then here, I'm just eyeballing where there are changes in that light so I can add that gradient. And then I'm also going to put a gradient on the outside edge of that stroke. So as the plastic kind of curves around, it gives it a little bit of thickness. Making another bolt here. Notice that it's black around that because that bolt is inset, so the light isn't going to hit that as much. So I give it a black circle around there. Now I'm going to combine these shapes so that I can add a gradient. Notice that I outlined those strokes that were prior strokes. Now they're shapes. I can add a gradient to that to make it look a little bit more metal. I'll add some texture later. And then now I'm just going to build the petals. So I'm going to use the rounded rectangle tool to save me the trouble of rounding the edge myself. It needs to be a little bit longer, so I lengthen it there. And then I'm just kind of eyeballing the general shape of the petal. They usually have that front, and they have a reflector. I'm going to make that reflector usually has bumps, so I'm just going to build that out of circles and then combine those circles with the shape builder tool. I'm going to grab that gradient that I already made to save myself some time. Get rid of that stroke and then copy that over by holding Alt and dragging. Add a little bit of an outside edge to that too. Then I'm just going to make some minor adjustments here. I wanted that to have a curved edge, and then I'm going to adjust that outside so it looks kind of like a metal plate. Once I get this built, I'll throw a nut on top of there. I'm just going to copy and drag that because it's the same thing. It's inset as well, so I can use that black circle. Group everything up, use the eyedropper tool to grab some gradients that I already made so I don't have to remake everything all the time. Once that is grouped, I rotate this 180 degrees and make a copy of it. But then I need to put it all in the same layer and throw one behind the other so that, the one's on one side of the bike and the other's on the other side of the bike. So Then I'm going to come in, get rid of the stuff that I wouldn't see from that angle, and make some minor adjustments. So, you have one of those petals that's looking right at us and the other petal that isn't. This part is kind of interesting. I'm going to make a rounded rectangle, and then I'm going to try to copy this gradient that I'm seeing from the reflections and the shadows. Then I'm going to use a warp to copy the shape, and then come in with my white arrow tool and manipulate that warp mesh to get it to do that. Now, I have already gone in and checked that the warp will apply to patterns and gradients as well, which is why you see the gradient bend with the contour. And then I'm just eyeballing that, and I'm following along and kind of creating, a little bit of depth as I look. There's the thread. Go back to Command Y to get outline view so that you can see where the actual lines are. You don't get confused by the colors, the gradients, or the strokes or whatnot. And then here, I'm just kind of eyeballing. I use the pen tool. I'm just kind of eyeballing that shape. I'm going to throw it to the back by pressing Apple left bracket, and then I'm going to start making these springs. Now with these springs, this is a really cool process. I'm going to use something called the blend tool. The shortcut for that is W. Basically, it will warp in steps or morph in steps something from one shape to another. So I create both ends of that spring, and then as you see there, it makes those adjustments for me. So I didn't have to create each one of those steps. I just used the warp tool, clicked on one point, clicked on another point, and then adjust the steps in the menu by double-clicking on the warp tool, and it creates that spring. Group everything up, and because my gradient is contained within the edges of that shape, that reflection follows just like it does in the actual image there. And then I can make that, group it, copy it, and put it where it belongs underneath there and behind that black thing. The next part is a little bit more difficult. I haven't figured out a decent way to do this, so I just kind of eyeballed it. But I'm just going to do that coil of spring. There's probably a better way to do this. I haven't thought of it yet, though. But I'm just going to draw that coil with the pen tool. Then I'm going to link up all of those things by highlighting them, clicking and dragging with the white arrow tool, and then averaging them and joining them together. And once I have them averaged and joined, I adjust the curves with the Convert Anchor Point tool to Shift-C. And once I get it kind of to where I want it, I need to outline that stroke or expand that appearance, and then I'm going to cut it with the Pathfinder palette so that parts of it are behind and parts of it are in front. Do the same thing here. Parts of it are behind and parts of it are in front. That way it looks like it's wrapping around. Just little tiny details like that. Then I'm just going to cut this bike frame so that I can get the metal parts, which are a little bit thinner. Make adjustments again with the gradient tool so that it follows along there, and then I'm just going to do a series of rectangles that are, kind of along the same path, different widths to do like the different widths that you see on a bike there. Then just use the gradient tool to follow those along. The same gradient at different widths will give it a little bit of depth, then copying and pasting on top, and then changing that to a blend mode that is darker or lighter, depending on which side the light is going to hit, as a little bit of depth there. Now I'm just going to rotate these petals. Now I'm just going to go around and kind of look at the bike and see how I need to finish it off. Okay, I've already made some of these pieces, so I don't need to make them again. I can just copy them over, get that to line up, use my Pathfinder or my Shape Builder tool to cut parts of these things. And, I can darken some of those gradients so that I have some contrast. Notice that the darker one is on the inside and the lighter ones are on the outside. I'm not really referencing any photos. This probably doesn't actually exist this way, but I'm just kind of drawing here. Now I'm going to use the reshape tool. You actually have to hit part of the object with the white arrow tool before you do that, and then you can just pull sides out. Notice I'm just making copies of things, or I'm just expanding them, so I don't have to recreate things all the time. And then I've already got my gradients. Now here what I'm doing is I'm creating a stroke again because I want to bend something. So I'm creating a stroke. I'm making that thick, then I'm expanding that appearance. This is going to become my mask. Then I'm creating a gradient, and I'm going to use U, or the warp tool, and everywhere I click, it creates a little grid, and then each one of those grids has a set of handlebars, and at where those grids intersect is an anchor point, and at those intersections you can choose a color that will go until it hits another anchor point. So I'm going to change my highlights to on those anchor points to be white, and then various shades of gray. But notice that the gradient bends around that, and I have total control of where that goes by using the white arrow tool, and the different direct select tools, and controlling those handlebars. So then I have a bent gradient around that pipe. This next step is crucial. I'm going to create a series of gradients that are going to give shadow to these pipes, but I don't know what I want the color of this bike to be yet, and I don't want to have to go change a bunch of different gradients. So if I create gradients and then use them as blending layers on top of that color, then I can go change a single object shape, as I show you at the end of this, and or a single object's color at the end of this, and I can change that color instantly, but it doesn't lose my highlights or my shadows. So the trick is just line everything up, and you'll watch me do this, and I'm just using the white arrow tool. But the key to this is that later, because I've done this a lot of times, where I've gone in and created the gradient in color rather than in grayscale, then decided that, oh, I want this object to be green. Well, I don't have shadows and highlights. I've got a series of 10 or 20 or more gradients, and each one of those gradients has different colors. It's infuriating to try to change the colors at that point in time. So if you do it this way and you create shadows and highlights that are separate and are used as blending layers, which is under the transparency panel, then you can come in and you can change the underlying shapes that those are blending with. At any point in time, you can change those colors, and everything else will adjust to it. Very important. Really important at this point in time to make sure that you're paying attention to your layers and you're organized and you're naming things, because as you start doing stuff like this, it starts to get really confusing if you haven't named things. Notice that I'm just copying and pasting or alt clicking and dragging these shapes so that I don't have to redo everything all the time. I just make minor adjustments. What you're seeing me do here is I'm making a copy of one of those shapes, pasting it in front, again with Command F, and then using that as a cookie cutter with the shape builder tool to kind of cut out the edges there, so I don't get buildup of gradients and blending layers and transparencies on top of each other. So a little fine tuning here. You just notice that I'm just using the convert anchor point tool, the A or white arrow tool, or direct select tool if you want to call it that. Now I'm just going to look. Now I'm just going to look around and make some little minor adjustments, make sure that those match up. Now here's the handlebars, and as I make these handlebars, I'm going to use the blend tool again. So I go a little bit slower here. Notice that I can control the number of steps that it takes. And then you just make minor adjustments. You can expand the appearance of those objects. Then I'm just going to copy, put a layer behind so I can control the stroke independently, rotate that around. But the blend tool is awesome. Get used to using the blend tool. It saves you a ton of time, and it can do stuff that you can't. Just adding a little bit of depth here. Circles again, and then using the shape builder tool. You can cut with the shape builder tool, cut and delete when you hold Alt. Really, really quick and powerful. Now I'm going to go in and I'm just going to add a little gradient here and there. So you'll notice that you can control the gradient. When it's a radial gradient, you can make it an oval with a gradient tool, and that adds a little bit of realism there. I'm going to just start adding gradients everywhere now here. These are going to be blended again in grayscale, and I blend them, and then I can control the colors underneath later. The eyedropper tool, you can push and pull color. Getting used to doing that is good. I'm just kind of checking, zoom in and check. Now watch as I change the color here. Notice that my shadows and my highlights are preserved. And I can change the entire color of the entire bike at one go because it's all one object, and it's the gradients which give you the shadows and the highlights are on top and are blending layers. So here's an example of one shape on top of another shape and reversing the gradient to give you a little bit of depth, to give that little emblem. I'm just going to come in and do some stuff here to the tire. This is the first time that I'm using an effect. I'm just using a blur, and that kind of softens the edge so it looks a little bit less like a vector. Then I'm going to cut that with the shape builder tool again, and then I'm just going to copy that over. You'll notice that I cut this, and then I can make a copy of it, and I can rotate that copy, adjust it a little bit so it's a little bit less prevalent. I think I adjust the transparency there, make it a little bit less. That gives it a little bit of roundness, a little bit of shine to that black rubber that you would normally see. So yeah. So check me out online on Twitter at Corey Kerr, and you can see some of my stuff at coreykerr.com. And stay tuned for part 2. I'm going to get into applying some more realistic looking things like textures to kind of scratch things up a little bit.